Every kid in school knows that the world of mitzvot are made up of 613 mitzvot. Taryag mitzvot. How do we organize the mitzvot? How do we count them? That already is not so simple. Different sources in the Rishonim count the mitzvot somewhat differently. We know from Chazal, we'll see in a moment inside, what the source is for Taryag mitzvot, but how you count them, that's already a question. One of the most important sources in the Rishonim as to counting mitzvot is one of the most important books of the Rambam, not the Mishneh Torah Yad HaChazaka, not the Moreh Nevuchim. I'm talking about Sefer HaMitzvot, often printed together with the Yad HaChazaka at the beginning of it. Sefer HaMitzvot, a very, very, very large portion of the book in the beginning is devoted to the logic as to how to count the mitzvot. Just that, and only then he goes into the positive mitzvot, mitzvot aseh, and then he continues into the mitzvot lo ta'aseh. Now the difference between the Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvot, this is a crucial point to begin with for today, between this and the classic, famous Sefer HaChinuch, which is also a book that organizes Taryag mitzvot, is the organization. Sefer HaChinuch's job is much easier. He doesn't have to invest effort into how to organize the order. He needs to decide from where in the psukim to take out a mitzvah. That's a big task. But the order of the mitzvot is basically from Moshe Rabbeinu. Parsha by parsha, that determines the order of the mitzvot. Mitzvat Purvo, Brit Milah, Gitan Hashem, on. But the Rambam took it in a more challenging way. The Rambam, who is the master organizer, anybody who learned somewhat of Talmud Bavli and somewhat of Rambam cannot not come out amazed as the fact that one individual brain was able to organize all Shas Bavli with so many other sources into one systematic system. So also when it comes to Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam doesn't go in the easier way of going according to the order of the mitzvot in Torah Moshe. He organizes the mitzvot in his own conceptual organization. And therefore, when we're going to go right now and read through mitzvah number 1, it's very significant because immediately it should lead us to ask, why is this mitzvah number 1? I'm reading inside mitzvah number 1. Mitzvah Aleph, I apologize I didn't have time. Been a little busy this week. I would have preferred to have the source in front of you. Try to focus. I'll read the Hebrew and I'll immediately translate it to English. Mitzvah Aleph. Hi tzivui, the command, asher tzivanu beha'amanat ha'elokut. The command to believe in the existence of God. Vehu, what is the content of that? Shena'amin, that we should believe. Sheyesh sham ilah, the siba, that there is there a source, a cause, a being, without going into all those different terms. Shehu po'el kol hanimtzaim, he's the source and he's responsible for everything that exists in the world. And what's my source? Where do I take this from, says the Rambam? From Parsha Yitro. We're getting there very soon in a week and a half. Vehu amro, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim min beit avadim, says the Rambam, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first commandment of Aseret HaDibrot, it's a mitzvah. It doesn't sound like the mitzvah, because Hashem doesn't say there anything to do. It's a statement, that it's a committing statement. You're obligated to believe in me, and I express this as such, without going too much into why it's phrased as such, and not as a command. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim min beit avadim. That is a mitzvah. Which? Mitzvah number 1, to believe that there is a source and a higher being that put this whole world into existence. I'm continuing. How do I know, says the Rambam, that Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim min beit avadim is the first mitzvah, conceptual mitzvah in the Torah? Because it says in the Gemara Masechet Makot, people in Shana Bet would be familiar with this. We learned this last year. Ubesof Gemara Makot, Amru, Taryag mitzvot ne'emru leMoshe b'Sinai. That's the source. When you ask, where's the source in Shas for Taryag mitzvot, 613 mitzvot? The Gemara at the end of Masechet Makot. So the Gemara says, how do you know? Chazal are always very honest intellectually. What's your source in the Torah for the fact that there are 613 mitzvot? The Torah says, it says in the last parsha, Parshat Sota Bracha, Torah tzivah lanu Moshe. Moshe commanded us Torah. Ratzal Omar explains the Rambam the Gemara, Minyan Torah, that the Gematria, it's not common that the Gemara uses a Gematria. Later sources do. The Gemara is not so common, and yet the Gemara does. Torah, says the Gemara, is Gematria of 613. The Gemara goes and checks and asks, but that's not the Gematria. It's like that famous Hasidic joke about the Rebbe who told us Hasidim, go and eat kugel on Shabbos because kugel on Gematria is Shabbos. So they go and they check and they consult with top mathematicians. They come back to the Rebbe and they says, but Rebbe, kugel on Shabbos is not Gematria. The same Gematria says eat two pieces instead. On that note, the Gemara also says, Taryag, it's true. Taryag mitzvot and Torah is not the same Gematria. But the Ikshua says, V'amru Torah begimatria Tafresh Yud Aleph, it's 611. Answers the Gemara, and the Rambam here quotes it in the first mitzvah, and this is the main point I'd like to draw out of here. Vayama Aneh, and the Gemara answers, Anochi ve'lo yeh mipi ha'gvura shma'anu. Anochi, says the Gemara, Hashem Elokecha, ve'lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai, which is the first of the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, were two mitzvot, and at the Har Sinai we heard from God's mouth. All the rest of the mitzvot we heard from Moshe. So when the Gemara says Torah tzivah Moshe and Torah is Gematria of 611, the Gemara says, I know exactly what I'm talking about. 611 from Moshe. Moshe commanded us 611. Torah tzivah Moshe. Hashem commanded us directly two mitzvot. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim and lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Now one has to understand before we go on, it's one mitzvah in a sense, but has two sides to the same coin. You need to know that God exists, and you need to know that God exists by knowing that nothing else exists but Him. And if the other side of the coin is not there, the first side of the coin is not complete. That's the way perception works in Olam Hazeh. That's the way perception works in Torah. Ever since we ate from Etz Hadat Tov Hara, it's not enough to know any coin from one side. You need to know that God is the only being in the world, and you need to know that there's no other being but Him. And that's the mitzvah taseh, and that's the mitzvah lo taseh. From now on, we'll talk about it as one mitzvah. Let's just call it the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I'll ask a question. Anybody who has an answer is welcome to respond. What is it about this mitzvah that we need to hear it directly from the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? All other mitzvot you can hear from Moshe, but this mitzvah you need to hear from Hashem's mouth Himself. Anybody?
Once we hear this one,
yes, Ali.
Once we hear that one, it legitimizes what Moshe tells us.
Okay, but why do we have to hear that dafka from Hashem? What's the meaning? How would you understand the fact that this mitzvah you need to hear from Hashem's mouth Himself? It's clearly very superficial and childish to say, well, they're only able to deal with two mitzvot from Hashem directly. Then it became already too much, and they said, as we know from the Psukim, Moshe, you speak to us. It's obviously much more intrinsic and inherent than that. There's something essential about these two first mitzvot. Again, we're calling it Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that you need to hear from Hashem's mouth. Yes, Ben? Loud.
Kadosh Baruch Hu is introducing Himself as God to the nation, so He say, I myself am Hashem, nobody else.
Very, very good, Ben. Shalom Aleichem. I'll phrase it in my own words, but it's exactly what I think what Ben said, and that is, the way the mitzvah is given to us is a manifestation of the essence of the mitzvah. You are mekayem the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha by standing in front of Him. When you experience Hashem and that you are in front of Him, then you are being mekayem Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. We say that so many times a day. Every single time I make a bracha, I refer to God as you, Ata. Then later on I move away and I speak of God. But in one word, Ata, I talk to God directly. Mitzvah v'emunah b'Hashem, I need to hear from Hashem because that's the way I perform it. I perform it in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's continue. Why is this mitzvah number one? What is it about this mitzvah that justifies being number one on the list of the Rambam? Clearly the answer is, and somewhat Avi alluded to that, and we'll elaborate on this for a second, and that is, just like the Gemara says in Masechet Sukkah, about somebody who mentioned one of the great Tanaim, who said on Simchat Beit HaShoeva, Im ani kan, hakol kan, I'll use that phrase for here. Hashem says about this mitzvah, if I am here, everything else can be here, and if I'm not here, nothing can be here. Meaning, if I, as God, and as God, I as a creator of the world, and I who's commanding the mitzvot, exists in your mind, there is room for all other mitzvot. But if, on the other hand, your mitzvot are there and your limud Torah is there, but I am not there, or to whatever extent I'm not there, to that extent all mitzvot may start having any legitimacy and any justification. Use a mashal. The Torah itself refers to itself as a tree. Etz chayim hi lemachazikim ba. As any tree, a tree in order to live, in order to be in fact etz chayim, it needs a source of water. What's the source of water of the tree? HaKadosh Baruch Hu claims to be the source of the life and the water of Klal Yisrael. It says in Sefer Yirmiyahu, He is the Makor HaChaim, He is the source of life, and He is the source of life of the tree of life. The Torah is the tree of life. Etz chayim hi lemachzikim ba. The Tomchei Mushal Torah defines itself as a tree. And Torah, which is a tree, Tu B'Shvat coming up soon. Torah, which is a tree, without the source of water, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself, means the tree is dead. It's a little extreme to say this, and I'm saying it anyways. A person who is in touch with all 613 or 611 mitzvot or branches of the tree, but the first two are not on his agenda, and he's not investing effort there, and he is not in front of Hashem on some level, he's not even aspiring to that, his tree is detached from the source of life. It's to that extent. I'd like to take things to even a greater level of extreme. For quite a few years already, both Torah, you find this in the Rishonim, you find it already in Chazal, you find it for sure in Baalei Kabbalah, for many generations already. But recently, in the past 100 years, Lahavdil or Shanat Lahavdil, you find that the world of science, cosmology, philosophers, physicists also speak with the same terminology, and that is that the entire world comes from one dot. From one nekuda, from one dot. Now, up to this point, Kabbalah, Torah, Judaism, and science, and philosophers, today at least, agree. Everything that exists, all time, all space, all matter, Hakol, comes from one dot. That we agree upon. What we disagree upon is one point earlier. Me'ayin bata, if we were to ask that point. Where did you come from? And here comes the biggest question possible. In reality, there's no greater question that could be than the following. Where and what is this point about? There's only two possibilities. Torah claims the point out of which everything came from is a point which is infused with God's will and wish to create a world. And science claims not necessarily. God is a non-scientific concept, and therefore that point out of which everything comes from may very well be, and there are many scientists who believe so, is from a complete random source. Now, why is this the biggest question possible? Because this question about this one point, one singular point, as science called it, is going to determine everything that stems from this point. However you define the point, that definition of that point is going to define every item that comes out of that point. All time, all space. All mass, all matter. All cultures, all species, every human being, Hakol. Everything that actually is, all stems from one point. So if that one point, it comes from a will of God, that means that the entire vast reality of the world is all infused with that God's will. And everything comes from nothing, and there's no intelligent source, and that point is random, as many scientists and philosophers will claim. That means that we swim in the one gigantic universe, which is one big soup of meaninglessness. Okay, I'm dafka taking it to an extreme, but to what I believe is a true extreme. One has to realize the extent. If the opening point, it's easier to relate to a point than to think about the endless, almost endless, infinite horizons of the universe. One point is either meaningful or meaningless. If it's meaningful, all that will open up from it ever will be meaningful, equally meaningful. If that point is meaningless, random, that means everything that will ever come from it is completely random. That means, and that's what I meant by the biggest question possible. Either the entire world, with everything in it, and every part of me, body or mind, whatever it might be, as meaningful as can be, or everything is completely meaningless. Now that's very extreme to present it as such, but if one is intellectually honest with himself, that is the outcome. And that's why this is the biggest question possible. Let's think about the implications of this. Whether the world is completely meaningful, and it's one big soup of meaning, if you wish, or whether the universe is one big soup of meaninglessness, is a choice that every individual, conscious human being has to make. A dog cannot make this choice. We suspect. I've never seen a dog sit down on a grass and reflect. At least not the meaning of the universe. A human being has a brain which is big enough to be able to do that. Judaism will claim you have a responsibility as an adult, as an intelligent adult, to conclude what is the truth. Is it that this world is completely meaningful, or is the truth is that this world is completely meaningless? But beware the implications. Torah will claim at least that if the world is completely meaningful, it leads to completely meaningful life. And if the world is completely random and meaningless, you may try to attribute meaning to everything and anything, but nothing has any meaning whatsoever. Now, what are the outcomes of that? We're not dealing here with philosophy. No point in philosophizing here. I always claim, I've said here before, I think that Jewish philosophy is an oxymoron. Why? Because Judaism doesn't believe in contemplating for no reason. Are you going to change as a person? Great. You're not going to change as a result? Don't waste your time. What are the implications of this discussion? The point is not whether I'm interested in cosmology or not. The point is the point. Whether or not this whole world, and therefore my entire life, is meaningful completely or meaningless completely. If it's meaningful, Torah will claim you're on the path to happiness. Because there's nothing that brings happiness to a person than having a meaningful life, regardless of what he may go through in life. And history is full of such examples of awesome people who led a meaningful life and were happy campers in God's world, and they went through misery in life. And people, the world is full of such examples, not only in Hollywood, all over the place. So people who have everything that Olam Hazeh can offer, and they walk around as depressed as can be, because their life is meaningless. And therefore their life and their mind is empty, and because of the emptiness, they experience the emotions that's associated with it, emptiness, and that is depression. And Torah will claim that when you're happy, that means you're alive, and when you're depressed, that means you are dead. We all have mild depression sometimes. That mild aspect in me which is depressed is a bit of death in me. Absolutely. And any aspect of simcha that I have in me is that aspect of life. And I have a constant choice that stands in front of me every day. Not only at Rosh Hashanah, when we read Parshat Nitzavim. See, I put forth in front of you today, on the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu, life or death. And I beg you, choose life. But you need to choose life. You need to choose life, because if you don't choose life, and somebody else is going to do it for you, that means you never acquired life. For you to acquire life, you need to consciously choose it. Nobody can choose it for you. Nobody can lead you into it. Nobody can think for you. You can have nobody to lean on. Somebody once came last year, I think, to visit in Yeshiva during this time of the year, and he was all alarmed because something that apparently was Rabbi Chaim Rosenblatt's, our great dear Talmid, claimed, somehow already fell into some kind of a doubt. So if Rabbi Chaim was not sure, so then how can I be sure? So my whole Emunah is then collapsing. You cannot have a crutch. You cannot lean on anybody. It's you and God alone. You were there alone. If indeed there is a Creator when you were conceived, and you're going to be there alone when you die, and you're alone in front of this moment. Nobody can serve there as a crutch. You can consult with people. You can have other people open up your eyes, but the choice whether I want to live this life as alive or whether I want to live this life as dead, with a meaningful life or a meaningless life, happy or depressed, full or empty, that's a choice that I have to make. Nobody can make that choice for me. I believe that's why this day is as central as it is to the year. That's why many in the staff will claim it's the most important day of the year. It's only a beginning. To get people to think, as Rabina said. This is the choice. It's a choice between Chaim and Mavet. If the person next to you is sleeping, I give you a heter to go like this to him. Chaval to sleep on a day like this. Not because of me, for the rest of the day. Please understand, people often think, from a very overly firmy place, that the bechira that you're judged over is actions. Mitzvot and averot, mitzvot. And when you go after 120, that's what you'll be judged over. Of course that's true. But how you act starts with how you think. And how you think starts with your worldview. Because if in fact your worldview is that the world is one big random place, so for sure, achol v'shato, ki machar namut, just have a good time. But literally have a good time. It's a Gemara, I think in Masechet Yuma, if I'm not mistaken now in Daf Yomi. Maybe I'm wrong. It's a Gemara in Shas, I think in Yuma. One of the Amoraim, or Tanaim, he got upset one day with his Talmidim. They were somewhere falling asleep, they were kidding around. So he knocked on the stender and says, I beg you, b'matuta minaychu, la tirti tarti gehenom, don't inherit two Gehennoms. Explains Rashi, either take Olam Hazeh but enjoy it, but the whole way through. Enjoy it the whole way through, so at least you have one world. Or choose Olam Haba and apply that here, but the whole way through. But to lose out on both worlds, you're not enjoying Olam Hazeh because you're too from. And Olam Haba, you're playing mediocre. So you're missing out, you don't come out of this world with any world in your hand. You haven't acquired any world. How I act, my littlest act, how I respond to the bus driver, how I speak to the cashier, stems from how I think, which stems from how I look at the world. I'm not trying to sound over dramatic. It is so. If you just reflect upon it, you'll see. A person who's living constantly in a place that he's being watched by God and judged, he's going to live differently. That's, the Ramah brings it at the beginning, the first seif on the Shulchan Aruch. Siman Aleph, seif Aleph B'Orach Chaim. Shiviti Hashem Negdi Tamid. In the same way that the Rambam counts mitzvah number 1 as Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the Ramah does it in his own style. The first mitzvah of the day, Shiviti Hashem Negdi Tamid. To aspire to get to a point that I'm always in front of Hashem. And he goes on to quote the Rambam from the Moreh Nevuchim, from the Guide to the Perplexed, who goes on and says, when you live your life in front of the king, as opposed to not in front of the king, the quality of your life changes. The way you speak, the way you walk, the way you respond, the way you dress, the way you undress, it's going to be qualitatively different when you're in front of a king. Goes down the Rambam and says, and if in front of the king, Melech Malchei HaMelechim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your life completely qualitatively changes. We all know that that's the case. Again, if it's all coming back to the same one singular point. If that one point is meaningful, everything in my life is as meaningful as can be. Even which shoe I put on first in the morning. I always say, everybody has that uncle back in America who will sarcastically, after your year in Israel, say, you really think God cares as to which shoe you put on first? And I always say, what's your salary? What do you mean? You're clearly God's secretary, so you get a salary for that now. You're deciding what God should care about and not care about? Who are you? God says I care about which shoe you put on first. Does it make sense to you? Does it make sense? To me, God, it makes sense. But that's the whole point. And sometimes halacha drives us crazy because it cares about every single point in our life. And when it does drive us crazy, it's a reappearance of telling Moshe at Har Sinai, it's too much for us. You speak to us, it's too direct. It's too intense. It's too present. Of course it's present. Nothing happens when a person's neshama leaves the day he dies. He doesn't fly to some world and all of a sudden meet God, as it says in the Zohar. Ki lo yirani adam v'chai, it says in Sefer Shemot. You don't see God when you're alive because of this body. The body is the big blinder. I'm not able to see God. Says the Zohar, Ki lo yirani adam v'chai. But after he dies, that's when the neshama sees the Shechina, God's presence for the first time. We don't fly to some world of Olam HaNeshamot. We're here. It's just that the blinder has been removed. I'm always in front of God. When I die, when I'm alive. When I was conceived, now when I die. Nothing has changed. All that changes in our perception has changed because the blinder was removed. Ashrei Hayish, who is able to realize that when he's alive. He didn't have to wait till he dies to realize, I didn't even know that God is here. I'm presenting things in an extreme way for food for thought. Clearly, few people in our generation are on a level that they are constantly, every moment, in Shiviti Hashem Nagdi Tamid. It reminds me of a cute Hasidic story I recently heard. Some Hasid was on the way in Europe to his Rebbe, one of the Magids, I don't remember who, before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, wanting to spend Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with him. And he stopped for Shabbat in some Jewish town, Kehila, with a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, and they got to know him. They were very impressed, and they begged him, "Dear Yid, please stay here with us in this our town. We also have Rebbeim, we also have Tzaddikim. Stay here, don't go on to the Rebbe. Stay here with us." He says the whole Shabbat, no, I don't want to stay here. I want to go to this Rebbe. Why? Keep going the whole Shabbat, and they cut a long story short. By Sudash Lishit, the Rav of the community turns to him and says, "You're so special, we'd love for you to stay here. We also have great Rabbanim." So the Chassid says, "Yeah, but none of the Rabbanim here, and neither you are in the level of that Rebbe I'm trying to get to." So they say, "How do you know?" So he says, "Because I know people's thoughts." He says, "You can read people's thoughts?" He says, "I can read people's thoughts." So the Rav says, "So tell me, what am I thinking about right now?" He says, "You're thinking about Shiviti Hashem Nagdi Tamid." He says, "Not right." He says, "That's exactly why I'm leaving and going on to the Rebbe." The point is, to be able to be in that mindset, that I'm constantly in front of my Creator, it's a high level. People work on that for a lifetime. The question is, am I even conscious of that? Am I conscious that I'm supposed to get there? Is it on my agenda at all? One can be very frum, and it may not be in his agenda at all. One may learn a lot of Torah and become a Talmid Chacham. It may not be in his agenda. Sometimes he's not even educated in that direction. That's, I think, al-chet that a lot of yeshivot have to do. I think that's something which, special thing about this place. Not stam do we give this day the weight that we do. Again, this is not a day in which you resolve your issues with God. It's a day that people are already hopefully mature enough in the year and removed enough cynicism from their background in order to be able to be somewhat receptive to such an awesome concept of God. It takes maturity, a lot of maturity. But that's what it boils down to, by the way. That's my experience after many years of meeting with a lot of boys, maybe thousands of hours. It boils down to maturity. A person who's willing to face God, but for real, is mature. And a person who's not is immature, and I see this every single year, hundreds of times. That's the question of this day. Do I go into it with maturity or not? It takes a lot of maturity. You have people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Many people. And they don't have the maturity to deal with God. It's too scary. And they'll keep mitzvot. But sometimes keeping mitzvot is an escape of God Himself. Scary statement? It's true. It's a scary statement. Let's move on. Tov, all very nice. Can you actually prove, Amos Luban, that in fact that this world is really all meaningful, that it comes from a meaningful source? Can you prove in fact that there is a creator to this world? I've said in previous years, and I'll say again, I don't believe in this term proof. I think it's a wrong term to use. You may hear it later on during the day. I'm only sharing my personal perspective. I think it's misleading. I think rightly so, it creates rejections and objections by people who are intelligent enough. It's not correct to use the term. In my eyes, many people might think differently. Maybe many Rebbeim, some of which maybe you'll hear later today. I personally think it's not a right term. And as we go on in the background of our conversation, I think it will be clarified as to, I'll keep going back to the point, why is it wrong to anticipate proofs? What's wrong about it? Let's start. You're 18 years old. You go out to the countryside, this time in Eretz Yisrael, and you see a flower naturally growing in the countryside. And you meet two people there. One is your great-great-grandfather, Avram Avinu. And he tries to open up your eyes to see there's so much intelligence embedded into this flower. He explains to you all the different in and outs of what goes into making it a flower. Okay. And he claims that it comes from an intelligent source. And then Next to you comes somebody else. What's his name? Dawkins? Yeah? Dawkins. And he says, yeah, there's a lot of intelligence there, but it doesn't come from anywhere. It just comes from a completely random source. And you're there in front of the flower, and you need to make that choice. Is this flower, is its intelligence meaningful or not? Does it come from an intelligent source, or does it not come from an intelligent source? You need to make the choice. What do I say? Little me if I were to be present? How in the world can an intelligent person claim that intelligence can come from non-intelligence? How can something intelligent come from nothing? Beyond me. In fact, if the world is so completely meaningless, that means that life is completely meaningless, if so you believe. What does it matter what kind of intelligence you actually have? Why are people so bothered as to the level of their IQ? But everything is really, after all, meaningless. Nothing makes a real difference. Who cares about anything? Nothing is meaningful. Who cares how much intelligence I actually have? But Avram Avinu may open up your eyes to realize another aspect, and that is, the flower is not just very smart, the flower is actually also beautiful. Where does this beauty come from? What will Mr. Dawkins say? You're talking to me in non-scientific terms, I cannot relate. What will Avram Avinu say? He'll say, when I was searching for God, this was a beautiful piece of art, and I was impressed. Personally, I always say, Amos, Luban, I'm not into art museums. They don't interest me. I get bored. I look for a bench to sit on. Museums don't usually have those things, and therefore I don't go to museums because I don't have any benches to sit on and to rest. I'm not interested in museums. I'm sorry if I don't sound worldly enough. For sure not art museums. I prefer to go to the countryside and kneel down and look at a flower, the real thing. Why'd I have to see a copy of somebody? The real thing itself. And the beauty moves me, and I look at the intelligence and the form and say, wow. And then I think, why would, being that I do believe in God, why would He create a world with flowers? For what purpose? Only so that should attract the bee and the whole process that we're all familiar with? Or there's something about beauty that God cares about, and that beauty testifies to the flavor, to the taste of the artist, of the great, great artist, with a capital A, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself. Let's give another example. Let's move on from flowers. Let's talk about human beings. According to Dawkins and his friends, once upon a time he used to be not a donkey, he used to be an ape. Okay? And as an ape, his great-great-great-great-grandfather had lips and had teeth, and he had a mouth and he had a tongue, and they were all there to be used in order to digest food. And at some point, somehow, thousands of years, if not more, millions of years went by, and the same very tongue and teeth and lips and throat all of a sudden jumped a level and became organs of speech. Just like that? How can all the parts of the mouth, which originally were only to digest food, all of a sudden evolve into something completely different that has nothing to do with eating food, which has to do with speech? What just happened to randomly happen that the tongue, which is completely digestive organ, the body all of a sudden said, you know what, let's actually be very useful. Let's use the same very tongue itself for speech. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that. And if anybody here thinks so, b'vakasha, be or don't be my guest, but I just can't understand how anybody intelligent would think so. Your tongue evolved from a digestive organ to a speaking organ just randomly with nobody thinking about? If you'll say, what does Torah have to say about it? Torah has a lot to say about it. Learn Torah, regular normative Torah, conventional Torah, for many, many years. When you're ready, go and study Kabbalah, and then maybe at some point you'll be able to understand the concept as to what the world of speech and what the world of the digesting of food have in common to justify being in the same very organ. The problem is that how many people stop and think about their mouth during the day unless they have a toothache? And go to the dentist. Oh, I have a mouth. We don't. We speak and we eat. And I don't know many people. I have never once did a person come to me in all the years here or in what Rabina calls the whole place and ask me, Amos, Luban, why do we have one organ for eating and for speaking? And I myself for many, many, many years didn't think about it until just like 3-4 years ago. So I'm like, come on, what's going on over here? Howard Dawkins and his friends, explain it. Did I prove anything in the past 10 minutes? I didn't prove a thing. Let's move on. And maybe by moving on one level higher, we'll have a better understanding why I think proofs are misleading and wrong to use. Let's just imagine the following situation. It's Thursday morning. I go to our great Chatan, Michal Brodsky, and I say, you know what, let's go to the biblical zoo with our green Shukschlepper t-shirts. Let's go and speak and meet with, I'm sure Rabin has connections also in the zoo, and we'll speak with the owner of the zoo, and he'll give us 3 chimpanzees, and we'll take them on the light train all the way and get off in Machne Yehuda, and you'll join there, Cohen and the other guys, do shukschlepping. And well, they'll just stand there and you'll tell the ape, when you see an old lady carrying a bag and she's in pain, go over, take the bag and help her onto the train. What are the chances that will happen? Efes. Efes is zulato. What are the chances that later that evening, Thursday night, during the Tiva Aryeh's night seder, the ape will go back and get onto his bed in the biblical zoo and turn to his friend and says, gee, this was a really good day. I helped all 3 old ladies. I feel really accomplished. I'm very happy camper in the biblical zoo. I wish it happens again also next week. What are the chances that the friend, the other ape that did not go, lies around all depressed because he wasted his day and he did not wake up in time to go shukschlepping on the train? He missed out on the train and he missed out on shukschlepping and he's all depressed. What are the chances? Do tell me, what are the chances? What are the chances?
0, zilch, nothing, nada.
Unfortunately, often we hear people lost their girlfriends. Sorry for using such a low term. They were dumped by their girlfriends, and they go up the top of a skyscraper, and they want to jump. They want to jump. Maisim shebachol yom, at least maisim shebachol chodesh. Put together guy to his girlfriend dumped him. He's depressed. He wants to jump off the skyscraper. As he's almost about to fall, I love her so much. Yeah, the proof is that I'm jumping. So everybody rushes. Police, psychiatry. Who cares? Life is meaningless. Isn't that what you believe? Let the guy jump. Who cares? Well, just because it's not moral that other people should have to clean up the mess? No, it's not because of that. It's because people realize that it's not right that a person should commit suicide. But it's against the whole Western secular American worldview. I am my own boss. I'm my own boss. Let me take my life. No, you can't. Catch his hands. Send him to the psychiatrist. He's locked up for a month. He can't commit suicide. It's my life. It's not your life. So whose life is it? So maybe really Chazal, thousands of years ago, very primitive old man, maybe they were right when they said, Ki al kochacha ata notzar, ve'al kochacha ata nolad, ve'al kochacha ata chai, ve'al kochacha ata met, ve'al kochacha ata atid liten din v'cheshbon lifnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nobody asked me whether I want to be conceived. For sure not. For fear anybody thinks differently, speak up. Nobody asked me whether I want to be born or what day, and nobody asked me what birthday I actually want on the calendar. Nobody asked me whether I want to live. Nobody asked me whether I want to die, and nobody's going to ask me whether I want to be judged in front of Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his Beit Din. Open up Mesilat Yesharim and Midata Anava. You'll see how scary of an experience that actually is. To stand in front of Beit Din Shel Mala. He says there that if a person were to imagine for one moment, completely, 100%, in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the king with his whole entourage, and the Beit Din, his gaiva will leave him and never come back, says the Mesilat Yesharim. But for that, one needs to really visualize and really, really put himself in that place. What are the chances that our friend the ape, and that Thursday afternoon, would be walking near the light train, and all of a sudden a 3-year-old kid left his mother and is running in front of the train? What are the chances that one of those apes with a green t-shirt is going to jump and save the life of that 3-year-old kid? I think Zephas also. And what are the chances that every single human being, I would claim Jewish or not, in Eretz Yisrael, would jump and save the life of that kid? And if it were to happen in New York also, don't have to always rank on the United States of America. Any human being would walk by a 3-year-old kid and save his life from being run over by a train. Why? But life is meaningless. So he lived only 3 years. Everything's swimming in one big soup of meaninglessness. Why do I feel good about myself when I did a good act? Why do I feel happy when I feel accomplished? At the end of a day, when I shuk-shlept? Everything is meaningless. Nothing has any meaning. So who cares? But I do. And even atheists, when they do a good deed, when they go to sleep at night, they feel good. Why? And why anybody in the world, religious or atheist, who wasted his day, at the end of the day, he's completely depressed? Why? These are questions that every person needs to ask himself. And it's a choice that every person has to make. All I can do here, me, little Amos Luban with his kazait brain, is try to share with you right now what I think Torah will say. What do I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu would say? They would say, the reason why Meir Cohen and his friends, I mentioned Meir because he shared with me his experience in shuk schlepping, and he was very, very excited, and I admire him for that, I must say. It's true for any other person who went and did it, or any other act of chesed in the yeshiva. Why do we feel good when we do an act of chesed? Torah will say, because at that moment you tasted the flavor of the piece of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, which was blown into you when you were made. Nothing less dramatic than that. Because God gives, and God is a giving being, and He created the world only at one motivation, to give and to bestow. And when you act upon that and same motivation, you taste God. Ta'amur ki tov Hashem. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Taste and you will see that God is good. But for that you need to taste. Why your friends who did not come to Israel for the year and are running around college, and every now and then, every year, a couple guys come in and say, I'm growing a lot in yeshiva, but sometimes, I think of my friends that didn't come to Israel, they're having such a good time in college, and they call me every now and then, and they had told me how they're fooling around, and at nights and on college. V'advarim yeduim. Why every one of them, the next morning, they are always and always depressed? Always. Why? Because the moment you wasted your day, or the moment you tapped into experiences which are inherently empty, such as lust, you experience internal emptiness, namely depression. The emptiness that a person feels the next morning is a testimony of the fact that lust is inherently empty. The reason you feel internally satisfied and full after helping an old lady and seeing how she smiles when at last you got to her home in Achlaot and you put down the bags. There was an experience of love, of care, of chesed, of loving kindness. Why? Because that is a testimony, it testifies to the fact that these are acts which are inherently full. People have asked me in the past, I used to give Midot cheer a year ago and 2 years ago, is it possible for God, after all He's God, to create a world in which cruelty is good and giving and caring for the other is actually bad? I said, absolutely not. But He's God. You're missing the point, I would say. An act of chesed is not something orchestrated by God. It's a manifestation of who He is. He didn't create Himself. He is. In a godly manner, you are an extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. Nothing was created there. There's one line that's extending from Him all the way down to you. The happiness, the simcha that a person has after shuk schlepping. The next morning, Friday morning, is it there? It's completely there. It's 3 Fridays away, still there. You know what? 80 years go by, and he may still reflect upon the fact that he was in a Tivarya, and our great tzaddik Chatan Michal Brodsky took him to shuk shlep one day, and he came out with such an internal satisfaction. He remembers that 80 years later. None of your friends in college fooling around, well, at the age of 80, reflect upon what they did back then. And ask any of them, are you proud of what you did? Proud? Even today they're not proud, and they know exactly that they're not proud of it. But you're proud of yourself when you go to the shuk. It's true that you need to clean your kavanah. Bezat Hashem, the second time you go, you'll go in clear, pure intention. Not only to feel proud, but to make the old lady feel better. Okay, but that's internal work that we all have to go through. Definitely the person who's speaking right now. That's endless. The person wants to work on this. Midat HaNekiyut and Mitzalat HaShirim, endless work, a lifetime work. To cleanse the motivation of our good deeds. Of course it's a lifetime work. That's a reason not to go and do good deeds in the world, because maybe my kavanah was selfish. Well, we have always mixtures of selfish kavanah. But an act of lust is 100% selfish. An act of shuk schlepping depends, every person. An aspect of it is completely altruistic and pure. Aspects of it, I need to feel like I'm a tzaddik. Fine. Again, this is internal work that every person has to go through. The reason why 8 days later or 80 years later I still wake up with a shuk schlepping experience is because I tasted eternity. Because it's a reflection of God who is eternal and nothing less than that. You understand? We're starting to wrap up and understand. Proofs don't begin. They're totally not the issue. Giving, meaningfulness, love, they're not scientific terms. They're human terms. And a human being is something which is way bigger and beyond science. And that is why, I'll tell you the truth, people who have your scientific orientation should go to Rav Chaim's classes, absolutely. I'm the first person to be, in a sense I brought him here. He's doing a wonderful, wonderful job. But at the end of the day, to tell you that I'm interested in any of these discussions, zero, efes. Why? We're not talking about the same plane at all, Mr. Dawkins and me. What are you talking about? You're busy all day explaining how a brain of an ape can develop into a brain of a human being. I'm talking about about giving and love and meaning. What does that got to do with the discussion? It doesn't have nothing to do with science at all. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He'll be the first to say that. Talking about love? What is love? Love belongs to the mind. I would tell Mr. Dawkins, I said this every year, with what part in you did you develop your theories, Mr. Dawkins? With my mind. Do you have any idea, any clue what a human mind is? Well, no. Science has no clue what the mind is. So how can you even open up your mouth about the origins of man? A man is not a shell. Forget religion for a second. Any human being, you ask, what are you, a body or a mind? Forget soul, mind. So of course I'm mainly a mind, I'm also a body, my body's only my shell. My mind, of course, integrity, my personality, who I am, my kavod, my ego, but none of that is physical. None of that is measurable. I always say, your nephew may say, I love you 18 today. It's very cute, but it's so not intelligent. Since when can you count love? What does it got to do with numbers? I'm convinced, I don't know his history at all, I don't know if he's married or not, but I would suspect that even Mr. Dawkins himself, if the phone would ring and somebody would offer him a shidduch, he would not ask how many molecules does she contain. He would say, it's probably a goy. First thing, is she pretty? But what does it matter if she's pretty or not? And nothing is meaningful anyways. If you're a good Nitiv Boyas, is she Balat Chesed? Is that a meaningful question? For Mr. Dawkins, probably not. For us, it's the biggest question in the world. Before anything else, is she Balat Chesed? How do we know this? Rivka, first shidduch story in the Torah. The story teaches that she's a Balat Chesed. She's Balat Chesed. Great shidduch. Not a Balat Chesed. Afterwards it says, talks about the looks. Don't get me wrong. Again, anybody who has even a bit of a scientific orientation, I think has a halachic chiyuv in the Torah to go and to figure out how to refute, with the help of somebody like Reb Chaim, Dr. Schroeder today, how to refute that whether outside of you or apikoros within you, for sure. I'm just saying that the discussion that we're taking right is a completely different level. Not interested in all of that. I always remember the episode years ago. I was living on the countryside, overlooking the mountains near Yerushalayim, overlooking the entire shore of Israel, from Hadera in the north and all the way to Gaza in the south. You see a beautiful, beautiful sunset there, especially this time of the year. And once, somebody who was Professor Schroeder's competition, if you wish, Professor Natan Aviazer. He's written the books. We have them here in Yeshiva. Speaks all over the world. We're very close. Grew up with his children. Two families grew up together. Anyways, he and his wife, he and Mrs. Aviazer, came to visit us one day, years ago, for dinner. And we're living in the countryside, and the view, the sunset from there was absolutely gorgeous, and the sky was turning orange, and I said, let's go out and look at the sunset. And we're looking at this gorgeous sunset and the colors which with the clouds and beyond words. Professor here started explaining the physics behind the color, because when the gases come in contact with the light rays, I have a lot of respect for the person, and I also own a lot outside and say, please be quiet. But that's definitely what I wanted to say. I'm not interested in the details that make up the totality right now. Of course it's significant and one can analyze. People don't go with their wife, or maybe with their girlfriend if there wasn't a yichud problem, to the beach and watch the sunset because it's romantic, because of the molecule of the gases or the light or anything, just because of the totality. It brings a deep sense of romance. Go explain it. I can't explain it. People experience that. And people experience that as very, very real. You see, all these things we're talking about has nothing to do with proofs. I haven't proved anything today. I don't want to prove anything today. The term proof, from what little of my knowledge, doesn't exist in our sources. What does exist in our sources is a completely different term, and I've been using it a lot in the past few years because that's what works in my mind. Torat Hashem Tmima Meshivat Nafesh. We sing every time that a person does a siyum here. And we continue and say, Edut Hashem Ne'emana Machkimat Peti. Torah defines itself as a testimony, as an edut. The Luchot HaBrit are called Luchot HaEdut. The Mishkan, where God comes to dwell in at the end of the Sefer that we're reading right now, is Mishkan HaEdut. They testify. That's what we spoke about today. Meir Cohen shuk schlepping, and Michal Brodsky smiling to an old lady in a shuk. They testify, both in their behavior and also in the way they feel afterwards. They testify to what life is. And so also, your friend who's fooling around in college, depressed the next morning, he testifies what that real act really means. He is a walking testimony that lust is empty. It's worse than that, actually. But nicha for now. It's an act of emptiness, and therefore his depression is a manifestation of it. In the same way that the Gemara in Eruvin says that if even the Torah was not given, we would learn modesty, tzniut, from the cat. The cat is conscious of its modesty? No, but it testifies, as the Maharal says, to its creator. As every picture testifies to its artist. If the cat is modest, it means that he who planned it, his modesty matters to him. And so it is for everything in this world. It testifies. You say, testimony, that's not, I don't have 100% proof, I'm not working along with it. Shut up. You're missing the whole point. What's the point of proving something? Testimony is not significant for you. Court doesn't kill based on testimony. Goyish court, Jewish court, al pi shnayim eidim yakum davar. Speaking of the Sefer Torah, that a few times a week we take out of our room there, and we get up and with respect when it walks by. as a testimony. Edut Hashem Emunah Machkimat Peti. The Gemara in Masechet Makot, not far from what we mentioned earlier, says how foolish are the people who stand up in front of a Sefer Torah and do not stand up in front of a walking Sefer Torah, meaning a Talmid Chacham. I would invite Mr. Dawkins to sit here. You want a whole day? I don't need more than a day. I need a minute. To watch the walking Sefer Torah. He used to sit there, now he sits here. If you want to see an advanced ape, maybe it really testifies that you really come from an ape. But I don't see an advanced ape. I see a Isha Elokim walking into the Beis Medrash and leaving this Beis Medrash every day, a few times a day. Can I prove it? What does it got to do with proof? It has to do with science? I can scientifically measure the glow from his face? What are you talking about? I always say, why is it that on the first day of Nativ Aryeh, take a kid from the biggest city, not going to use names, on the West Coast, coming with, let's say, quite a lot of cynicism, standing next to the bathroom, first day, his whole demeanor, his whole body language, oh Hashem, nobody around today anymore is like that, but the beginning of the year, every year, quite a few guys like that. Cynicism pouring rivers everywhere. And Rav Nebenzahl walks out of the bathroom, and the guy jumps back. Well, you're jumping. You don't believe in anything. You reject everything. You mock everything. Mitzvah min Torah in this generation to mock. What are you jumping? I always say about that. The Gemara says, Torah says, Klal Yisrael lives properly when we live like him. Even the animals in the field. So I guess also, New York kid, and his first name, even he can say it. Even he can see, if an animal can see. Famous story I always quote about Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yinkom Damo, who went to collect money before the Holocaust in New York, and he got to the house of the big Gvir, and there was a big dog barking there, and the moment Rabbi Wasserman came, so the story goes, and people who were there, the dog went silent, and attached his face, its nose, to the glass door, and it was silent, frozen. And the moment Rabbi Wasserman left, he started barking. Back to his regular barking. Don't want to believe the story? Don't believe the story. Can I prove the story? I can't prove anything. As I see it, the person who usually sits in this seat over here is a walking testimony of Mitziut Hashem in this world, because he acted upon himself and he worked very hard to bring out of himself his Tzedem Elokim, and in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu, on his last day and only on his last day, became an Ish Elokim, v'zot ha'bracha she'yavach Moshe Ish Elokim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto, that person, in his level, became an Ish Elokim. And when we stand up in front of him by this time of the year, we do it genuinely, not because we have to. Because we see there's something much bigger than physicality that's walking amongst us. And we all possess those potentials. And we all possess aspects of it, not only his potential. Everybody in this room, Baruch Hashem. Hashem gives a lot of siyata d'shma to Rabbeinu, and we get great guys every year. Mamash great guys. Better than the average in other places. I don't want to say what I think. Something special about the guys here. Every single time we're zochet to have guys from the Nativ Aryeh for Shabbat, my wife is so impressed. Mamash, the midot of people possess it. The question is, how much do I want to spend the rest of my life bringing more and more and more of the chelek eloka in me out? It's a choice that every person has to make. The more I draw godliness out of myself, the more alive I will be. That's what Torah will claim. The less, the more dead I will be. Life and death doesn't begin at death. Life and death begins now, today. Hine, po, achshav. We don't have that many minutes left. I'd like to switch for a moment quickly. Sharp turn. Speaking of testimonies from an individual human being in this Beis Medrash, who I say was a walking testimony to God's presence. The way he carries himself, the way he acts, the way he's not even conscious of the fact that people are getting up in front of him, his humility, his emet. Every single midah and Misrat Yesharim you see walking there in front of you. It's not the book, it's not the theory, it's reality. Let's move on from an individual Jew to the Jewish people. It says Yeshayahu Navi, Atem Eidai Neum Hashem. Hashem says to the Jewish people, you are my witnesses. You testify to me in the world. I don't take physical bodies. I appear in the physical world. That's what that pasuk means. And it's a theme throughout all of Tanakh. I appear in the physical world through you, the Jewish people. You testify to me. On so many different levels. On an individual level, we gave an example. On a Klal Yisrael level, we testify to God's existence in the world by the fact that we began, our very beginning, began as a birth of a child from parents who were already old people. 100-year-old Avraham Avinu gives birth to Yitzchak. And that sets the stage for one long thousands of years of Yitzchak, of laughter. Laughter at what? Laughter at anybody who tried to get us off this planet Earth. Yitzchak and his descendants mock the Christian church, mock Hitler, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro. Where is he today? And where are we? The ongoing existence of the Jewish people throughout the ages, despite every single attempt in every generation to erase them from the face of the earth, including as we're speaking right now at this very moment. We know how many people are very close, not that many thousands of kilometers away, that are trying from morning to night to get rid of us from the face of the earth and to throw us into the sea. And we say this since Yetziat Mitzrayim every single year, because it continues every year. That's the way Hashem introduced Himself at Har Sinai to wrap up our discussion. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Who? And I took you out of Mitzrayim. You experienced that, and you experience it every generation. What began in Yetziat Mitzrayim continues every year and every generation. There's always somebody trying to demolish us and to throw us into the sea and to erase us from the face of the earth. Babylonians, Romans, Haman, Hitler, and everybody's thrown off the stage of history. And Am Yisrael Chai, many of you, Baruch Hashem, are going to be going later on this winter to experience what Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, experienced when they left Europe and they left Auschwitz to see the birth of the state of Israel just 3-4 years later. We're here today, and one of the recent staff meetings, end of last year, beginning of this year, there was discussions in terms of how much significance, how much discussions should take place in yeshiva when we get that day like Yom HaAtzmaut. You'll see, it's getting there in a few months. It becomes a little problematic. Nativ Aryeh is a very diverse staff. People with different hashkafas, to bring it up, not to bring it up. Little me, I expressed my opinion, which was not accepted necessarily. I don't 100%. I don't need my opinions to be accepted. That we should have a panel in today, not only on alumni Shabbatons as we do at DRS. Let's have another panel. Different people on staff will express their opinions. What's wrong with that? Why am I mentioning it? One person in the staff said something which is very true, but also very troubling. It says today already, the years went by, people are already not so occupied, they're not really so much reflecting upon historical patterns of the Jewish people, they're more interested in their own personal internal processes. Chassidut is very popular. I took you out of Mitzrayim. I took you out of Bavel. I took you out of Haman. I took you out of the Romans. The Christian church. The birth of the state of Israel, the biggest slap in the world, the biggest mockery to the whole ideology of the Christian church, of the Vatican. We still exist. We began again recently, 10 years ago, so the biggest center of Jews in the world. We're a walking slap on the face of the Vatican. Our whole being and existence is a mockery to them. Come with me next to Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the Chassidut Boyan. I go there every year to their sukkah. Welcome to join. You see thousands of Hasidim dancing on the, whatever they're called, bleachers. I always brings me to the same place I always go to here in yeshiva. I don't plan on thinking so. Always takes me there. 70 years ago. Where were we? Where are we today? Yimach Shmo v'Zichro, lost somewhere under the ground of Berlin. Am Yisrael Chai. I don't understand the Holocaust. Of course I don't understand the Holocaust. Anybody who starts opening his mouth in that direction is very not intelligent, I think. We don't meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu always in speech. The ultimate meeting with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in silence. Rabbeinu alluded to it in his own style earlier. Eliyahu Hanavi in Sefer Malachim in our Bananut Shir in Tanaveh we saw recently, he comes to this place of Kol D'Mamadaka, a subtle sound of silence. For a Jew, this is not a rock song from the 70s or 80s. The sound of silence is the way we meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In our generation, it's very hard. Such a loud generation. Vayidom Aaron HaKohen loses his two sons on his most greatest day of his life. Chanukat HaMishkan. You meet God with silence. And a person who claims, and often I hear that's a cop-out answer. If you claim that silence in front of Hashem is a cop-out answer, and that's all that you have to say about the Holocaust, so then I'll say that. So then you're a pagan. If you're not willing to realize that God is the creator and you're only a creation, you're a pagan. The ABC of coming to stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is standing in silence. That's when you welcome Him into your life. And that's a lot to think about. That's not so simple to get to that place of internal silence on many, many, many different levels. We have to wrap up, and I'll wrap it up as such. I see it as such. You know these psychology tests sometimes that they give you a picture and you can see different things in it? Tell me how you interpret the picture, I'll tell you who you are. That's this world. Olam Hazeh is a picture handed over by its creator to every single Jew and every single person for that matter. Tell me how you interpret the world, and I'll tell you who you are. You're not judged only after your deeds only, as we said, and not only over your thoughts. Primarily you're judged over what worldview did you choose to take. You're the boss, and you'll be judged, I will be judged, as to which worldview, what map of reality did I choose to possess during my life here in Olam Hazeh. From there, what trickles down are my thoughts, the way I speak, and my actions. This day is significant because it's bringing forth the stage of discussion and yeshiva. What is my worldview? Not anymore in any way. I'm speaking to myself sitting on a fence with a maturity to realize it all goes back to one point. If that one point is meaningful, the entire universe is swimming in a soup of meaningfulness. And if the world is coming from one point of meaninglessness, this whole world is meaningless. Life and death, it's to that extent. It's dramatic questions. To sit on the fence is which many of us suffer from. Youngsters and older people in our generation. Sitting on a fence is an escape of intellectual honesty. I'm not really willing to face myself and face reality and face God and look straight into the eyes. And it takes a lot of maturity to hear that, because sometimes the implications, not sometimes, always have to do with changing aspects of my life, and we don't like that. We like when things are stable. God does not like though that things are stable. And the thing is that usually when we have disagreements with God, He wins and not us. I made you to change. I made you to become. I made you not to be. A goy can just be in this world. I made you for something else. I made you so that Thursday afternoon you can go to the shuk and schlep, unlike an ape, unlike Curious George, and go on and help the old ladies get onto the train. You will be a happy camper as a result, because you will experience the godly part in you. But what I will gain, God says, is that many, many hundreds of people will gaze at you and say, wow, look at these frum guys, such sweet boys. And look, they're helping this old lady. You may not even be conscious that somebody's watching you, and what you're doing at that point, according to the Rambam, is the greatest mitzvah taseh in the Torah, and that is the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. The Gemara says, what is Kiddush Hashem? When people see, Ploni shelamad Torah arbe re'u, kama na'im ma'asav, a person learned a lot of Torah, see how beautiful are his deeds. That is Kiddush Hashem. When a person, when they keep up, happens to behave, unfortunately, Rachmana litzlan, in the worst possible way, in a not nice way in the street, people say, see how ugly are his ways. That's the ultimate choice. That's why I put you into this world. You can either be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim or Mechalel Shem Shamayim. You can either increase my presence in the world by being more and more godly. When you shukshlet, you're acting in a godly way. Who knows if that shuk-schlepping idea is not what led, Baruch Hashem, the siyata deshma to our dear Chatan Michael to get married, Baruch Hashem, next week. What a tremendous simcha for Yeshivat Netiv Aryeh. One of the most beloved people in this building. Rightly so. Pure neshama like him had to think of such an idea. I know one of those old ladies in the shuk, and how much her heart gets to be filled up with joy when they come help her. She tells me, you gain feeling what it means to feel like God. Not to feel God, to feel like God. In our Shana Bet, Emunah seminar, I mentioned, and we'll finish with that. Once, many years ago, I always mention this big black guy I once saw on TV when I was visiting my brother-in-law in Washington. Curly hair and medals all over himself, standing on stage in one of these Christian preaching stations, channels. I think grew up in the States, so this was a little interesting to me. And he's standing there and asking the crowd to feel God. And I tell Steve, my brother-in-law, I know this guy. This is Mr. T. And Mr. T here, for those who know, is giving mussar to the Christian world to feel God. We're not interested in feeling God. We don't end there. It's a matter of feeling like God. When you go out of Netiv Aryeh Beis Medrash and Shuk Shlep, you get to feel the way God feels. It's way more profound than feeling God. It's airy-fairy, and it's flaky as can be, like everything that Christianity is about. I'm not here to belittle in the proper context, in the special times, yes, to feel God. I suspect that's very different than what Mr. T's experiences are. We're talking about a higher degree, feeling like God. But God gained something from that. His world, to whatever extent that only He knows, became a better place. When all those people saw the Netiv Aryeh guys shuk-schlepping, Hashem says, each and every one of you deserve a kiss on your head. I'm proud of you. That's why I made you. That's why I created the world in the first place, so that I get to be known to the world. What does that mean? Not just that people get to know that I exist. People get to know what it means that I exist. People get to know what I am by human beings behaving like me. When a person acts and is an act of chesed, and he devotes his life to that, he becomes a partner to God's creation, because that's what the world was created for in the first place. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Have a very good day.